we will take a look at the headlines themselves and all the stories that were making the top in the recent week in our country. And on Monday, we begin with the Herald newspaper that had a very fascinating headline, which read, a SADC summit call thwarted. And SADC issues that have been raising alarms across the country prior to the recently held elections. This comes as the SADC Election Observer Mission head and former Zambian Vice President Dr. Neves Mumba sought to discredit the country's just ended harmonized elections, which saw ZANU-PF presidential candidate President Mnangagwa declared the winner, beating his closest rival, Mr. Nelson Chamisa of the CCC. But his unsubstantial plans were exposed as well as shamed. We will now take a look at the Newsday on Thursday, which made a headline on the rise of HIV amongst teens, a shock rise in the HIV positive teens. The paper reveals statistics from the United Nations Population Fund, which is the UNFPA, which showed about 350,000 girls between the ages of 10 and 19 falling pregnant between 2019 and 2022 in Zimbabwe. This is really scary, especially when the country is targeting to end the pandemic by 2030. What should be done? Surely we need to make a plan as a country. And in business, we facilitate the use of the ZWL, which is also known as the Zimbabwe dollar, and the businesses are telling the government that. This has led in the Financial Gazette, and while the Daily News headline says government is keen to keep the ZWL, which is also known as the Zimbabwe dollar. Now, a little bit of a contrast there, but we'll be divulging into that a little bit later here on the headliner. And the prices are stable as businesses are encouraged to keep the use of the Zimbabwe dollar backed by the US dollar. Yes, those are a few of the headlines that you will be getting to get an appreciation of in this week's episode of the headliner, as well as many other headlines that we'll be taking a look at. And most definitely, I know there is some art stories. So for those arts lovers, please do stay tuned. Otherwise, we are taking a bit of a break, and we will be back with more. Please stay tuned. Hello viewers, and welcome back to the second segment of the headliner. And most definitely I am now joined by an award-winning Zimbabwean journalist who has not more than 20, not more than 21, but more than 28 years within the media field. And this is Mrs. Victoria Rushidzo. Welcome, madam, to the headliner, our debut episode.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. Now, we do know you were last on the screens a very long time ago. You were telling me earlier about the program.
Oh, yeah.
What was the name of that program?
It was called The Insight.
Okay.
Yeah, I would interrogate people on various issues to do across the sectors of the economy.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So now The Insight is getting into the headliner.
Oh, yeah.
So we will get right into it. Now, the Zimbabwean President, Comrade Emerson Mnangagwa, on Monday announced the new 26-member cabinet, and following his re-election for the second term last month. Now, the president retained some government ministers in his portfolios, and we have seen some changes, like the former energy minister Soda Jemu, who was appointed the new mines minister. Young people were infused, as well as a balance to do with women, which you must be so excited to be seeing and hearing about.
Indeed.
Absolutely. We will be expecting to see you in cabinet very soon once again.
Thank you for the prophecy.
Okay, absolutely.
It's my desire one day.
But for now, let's get into perhaps the criteria that was used to select this cabinet. We want to know, maybe the general populace once again wants to have an appreciation of what criteria is used to appoint new ministers, and how do we know that these chosen people are credible for their duties.
Okay, good. I think firstly, as we generally know, for you to be a cabinet minister, you have to be a member of parliament.
Oh, yes.
Except for the 7 that the president can pick from whosoever he wants to appoint.
Absolutely.
But you have to be a member of parliament. Like you notice, we've got some ministers who are no longer ministers because they were not eligible even for selection.
Absolutely.
So the president had a pot from which he was picking people, and those are the MPs that had been voted to. And then a few others who were his choice. Is allowed by our constitution to do that. So that is the criteria that is initially used. Then the appointing authority, who's the president himself.
Oh, yes.
I've known him even before he was president to be a strategist.
Oh, yes.
And someone who really goes for what he wants to see happening. So he has programs, he has Vision 2030 that he wants to see implemented and achieved.
Okay.
So in that regard, he has to think through the people that he is appointing. He wants people who will deliver. He wants people who will carry the nation forward.
Okay.
Remember, he's always saying, no place, no one will be left behind.
Yes.
And then none but ourselves.
Oh, yes.
So when he's crafting his budget, I think what goes through his mind is, so who will best serve as minister of this portfolio, women's affairs? Who will best serve as minister of finance? So what I've noticed is he doesn't go by the majority, what the majority wants, because the majority may not be privy to the requirements or what is in his mind. So he is the one who chooses who must be appointed. And I believe that is exactly what he did.
Absolutely. And let's talk about perhaps what social media was saying. I know these are the headlines, and most of the headlines were looking at some of the digital print that we have these days. I know you're into print media, but yes, we are also looking at the digital space.
Oh yeah.
Those are also headlines themselves.
Yes, true.
There was question on certain portfolios and ministerial offices that were occupied by individuals, and these are individuals that were put into office via their access to being members of parliament.
True.
Yes. So our question perhaps of the day is, does one need to be qualified in a certain field, especially once, you did say our president is a strategist, and is it strategic to appoint one minister who's a member of parliament but perhaps not qualified in the field that they are appointed to as a minister or even as a deputy minister?
Yeah, I get your point.
Yes.
I believe being qualified in that particular field or ministry is a plus, but it's not one of
prerequisite.
It's not a prerequisite.
Okay.
You can be in that ministry, govern it well, learn even more about it. We've seen, without mentioning names, a number of ministers in previous governments who people on social media and everywhere will be shocked. How come he has appointed this one? I remember, okay, maybe I can mention one name, Sodashem. People, when he was appointed, social media was awash. Who is he? We don't know him. He comes from this rural area, is this and that.
This is in the last dispensation.
In the last dispensation.
Yes.
But I think a lot happened and they achieved. And the president didn't remove him based on what social media was saying.
Absolutely.
Social media is a very good platform, but it can also be very dangerous. Very dangerous, and there's a lot that happens there. But I want to say there are ministers that were appointed, and why don't we give them a chance as Zimbabwe to prove themselves? The president gives people like 100 days objectives to fill KPIs. So I'm sure if they're not performing, he still has the prerogative to remove them.
And are there teams that are there to support the ministers? I know there are portfolio committees. We also do have permanent secretaries, individuals.
Yes, definitely. Because every ministry has a CEO.
Okay.
These are political appointees, the ministers, but there are CEOs who run the ministries.
Okay.
These are the permanent secretaries. Those indeed have to be qualified. Those indeed have to know what they're doing. And they can always apprise the minister, and the minister can also maybe have an oversight role over how they perform.
Absolutely.
Such that I think one of them, if you want us to mention a name, was like Tatenda Mawetera. Why is he ICT? The president saw it fit that looking into a lot of things that we are not privy to, that she must be the minister.
And she's young. She should know.
She is young, and she's also very qualified academically.
Absolutely.
She's actually currently studying for a doctorate. She's got an MBA in strategic management. She's got an undergrad. So I feel she can do it. Let's give her a chance.
Right.
Many people are doing things that they didn't know before, but there is also what we call on-the-job training.
Okay.
Why can't we take advantage of that?
Absolutely.
There's also a lot of information. AI can give us so much information.
Absolutely.
If I'm not too aware or too to alert to a certain issue as a minister, you can always have resources that can help you. Within ministries, there are structures and systems. So a ministry will not collapse because they did not appoint an information technician or information technologist. But I think she will do a great job.
And I mean, still to do with the name that you mentioned, Honorable Tatenda Mawetera, is it a prerequisite once again? Perhaps the public was awash with questions on social media saying there is need for the public to have a view of a CV. Is it necessary for that CV to be put out to the general public? And is there some kind of platform that we can all see the people leading us in these separate ministries and say they are definitely suited for the job, even if they are not particularly qualified in the field? But we, perhaps you know that she has an MBA. The public didn't know. The public perhaps thought otherwise. So how best can you say that people can have an appreciation of their leadership as well as the leadership's qualifications?
For starters, if the president was to put out CVs of ministers and get comments before appointing them, it would be chaotic. Cabinet would be chaotic. The country would be chaotic. He cannot do that. Even if you are applying for a job, you don't put your thing on internet, but you take it specifically
to the recruiter.
To the recruiter.
Yes, yes.
But the beauty of the internet, it keeps records.
Okay.
So if you are so keen to know and understand someone, just Google their name.
Google their name.
You get the information.
Absolutely.
And also, why don't we have confidence in the person who appointed that person to be an MP? The people from his or her constituency have faith in that the person can deliver. Not in one aspect, but in all aspects. Because people want to be served in 360-degree aspects of their lives. So why don't we have confidence in that? Then secondly, why don't we have confidence in the president who's appointing? Himself. Because the president does not want to fail, remember. He wants to deliver because his idea is to deliver to the people. So he appointed people who will deliver. Absolutely. If they disappoint him, they're taken off the job.
Absolutely, which is succinctly answered. Thank you so much. And we would like to perhaps just as we wind up our conversation, why were there changes in the cabinet? New ministry, new faces, old cabinet infused with young blood. What can you expect from this melting pot of individuals?
Yes, I think an assessment was done of where we are as a country under the Second Republic, the first 5 years, what we have achieved, what were our weak points, what were our strong points. So to ensure that the weak points get stronger and the stronger are consolidated, the president then had to say, let me have a potpourri, a package of ministers who will take us forward. So I think the changes in terms of ministry, like there are some ministries who were then maybe broken into two. Like the ministry, it was Ministry of Health and what?
Yes, absolutely.
And the Ministry of Tourism.
And sport as well.
And tourism, sport and what?
And
so
recreation.
I think it was more effective and more impactful for the ministries to be cut like they were done.
Absolutely.
And then the two ministers are given the specific mandates. Maybe it had become too broader for one person to oversee, to monitor, or even to implement. So they then had to cut those so that there will be specific targets. Yes. Specific measures for a specific aspect of that ministry which was taken out. Okay. And the new faces, yes. Maybe someone in a certain, I will not mention names in this regard, because there are some ministers who were moved to other ministries. It's also part of strategizing to say, okay, in the last 5 years, I've seen that person's strength. I think it's more in this area than here.
Absolutely.
Or I've seen them deliver. They've done the best they can. Let me take them to make changes in the other ministry. Yeah. That's what I think happened.
Thank you, Mrs. Victoria. Obviously, your wealth of knowledge is always a worthy contribution here on The Headliners, and we are so excited to be having you here once again.
Thank you so much for having me.
I do think as we have our maiden episode, I'll say it categorically, clearly, that you will be a key source with regards to many of the issues that we'll be tackling here on this show.
I'd love that. I'll take it as an honor.
Absolutely. We look forward to seeing you. That has been Mrs. Victoria Ruzidza, who is joining us here in the second segment. We are going to be getting into our very third and final segment very soon. Please do stay put. This is The Headliners. And welcome back, viewers, to the very last segment of our exclusive program, The Headliner, the Editor's Choices segment. And today, our in-house editor is Theophilus Chuma. Now, Theophilus is a multi-award-winning broadcaster, as well as someone with interests with regards to climate change, as well as global warming. Let's hear what Theo has brought us today. Theo, welcome to The Headliner.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. It's indeed a pleasure for you to be hosting me.
Absolutely. It is indeed a pleasure to be having you here because we are looking at issues that are most definitely affecting what is happening around the globe, and as well as around Zimbabwe. Now, we want to perhaps just get into, for the layman, for the everyday person who is at home, what is climate change, what is global warming, what are these issues that you have brought to the table today?
All right, thank you so much, Kathleen. You know, when we talk about climate change, this is a very topical issue that has really hogged the limelight across various global platforms. It really relates to the changing weather patterns, which are bringing about many phenomena like extreme temperatures and also increased rainfall or reduction in rainfall patterns. And we have seen this phenomenon in Zimbabwe growing probably in the last 5 years, the magnitude of which we can relate to 2019 when Cyclone Idai happened in Zimbabwe and Mozambique. And, you know, the intensity of this cyclone really puts into perspective the effect of climate change. And over the last the 3 or 4 years, the threat of climate change has really grown or expounded out of proportion, because when you look at the southern parts of Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique, Zambia, even South Africa and Botswana, these are nations that are more susceptible to issues of climate change.
Oh, yes.
Combined, the World Food Programme estimates that at least 49 million people are seriously exposed to food insecurities owing to the growing challenge of climate change.
Absolutely. Which brings me to my next question, Theo. We are looking at a time where we are ushering the new cabinet, and here in Zimbabwe, we do have a ministry solely responsible for that side of things. And we want to get an appreciation from you with regards to statistics, as well as the metrics, the data, and the analytics that speak to the times that we are in with regards to Zimbabwe being food secure. Can you say that we are food secure in the case of our disaster preparedness?
All right. You bring a very, very important aspect into this whole thing when we zero in on Zimbabwe. I think government has actually done quite a lot in terms of preparing the nation against such vagaries being brought about by climate change. When you look at probably within the last 4 years, government has really emphasized and prioritized construction of dams. That's one measure in terms of climate proofing the agricultural sector, where we have water harvesting bodies that are of a high magnitude, such as we have witnessed over the last years. And also we have seen various programs promoting climate proofing, not only at commercial level, but even at you know, subsistence level, where we have the Fumvuza programs running. And this has really prepared, you know, building resilience around communities. But I think over and above that, government is also coming up with various measures, not only looking at protecting livelihoods, but just 2 days ago, there was the launch of the biodiversity economy study, where they are also moving in to protect the wildlife, because in most cases, we see that when we talk about climate change, usually the focus is on the human side of the events. But we really do not focus on...
that there's also appreciation of life within our wildlife.
You see, and besides, biodiversity contributes at least 60% of the country's economy, and it provides much employment. We talk about nature tourism. We talk about even forestry. You know, the statistics currently, you know, when you look at our forestry capacity, we're losing at least 300,000 hectares of forests annually, and this is due to a number of factors. And when you look at that kind of rapid decline in terms of forestry, and how this forestry sector then is an important measure to absorb the carbon that then leads to climate change. There is that emphasis from the government to make sure that they come up with various, ring fencing mechanisms to make sure that they critically address climate change.
Absolutely. Theo, to mitigate some of these factors, I know you've spoken about emissions, you've spoken about a very vast amount, a myriad of issues that the everyday Zimbabwean perhaps doesn't even know they contribute towards climate change and global warming. Okay. How can you say that the young man, the young woman, the old lady or the old man, or the auntie, the uncle, the brother, the son, who's watching at home, how can they, fight global warming? How can, what is the first step we can take as a collective, as Zimbabweans, saying we're putting our hands together and saying, is it stopping of littering? Are there enough measures that if someone is caught littering, or is it just someone is left, just to do? We know that there's a lot of things that contribute, but I'm going to let you divulge into those issues.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So, every hand needs to be on deck when we're fighting climate change. Yes. But, I think the major culprits when it comes to really issues that speak into climate change, it's, the big guys in the industry, the ones who pollute the air that we breathe, are the ones who contribute much carbon to harm, the environment. And I think this is where much awareness has to be raised. When we talk about, carbon emissions, I think there was a conversation just about a month ago where there was a forum on carbon credits. I think there was a proposal to say that, companies need to come up with at least mechanisms for gaining carbon credits, where, for example, you are sold 1,000 carbon credits and you're supposed to be exhausting those carbon credits. I think it's a measure that can be, strengthened, and also make sure that this really comes hard on these commercial companies that really have an impact on the environment. But, when we look at Africa as a whole, and Zimbabwe probably we're just contributing at least 3% of the whole carbon emissions. Yeah. But I think...
In the world?
Yes, in the world. Okay. So I think...
But that's a very huge number as a country.
3%.
I wouldn't...
When compared to one nation like China, and probably other developing nations, other developed nations like the United States.
First world countries, yes.
Yeah, combined 3% Africa, but when you look at the percentage that one country is contributing, it tells you of a huge story where much awareness is needed. But I also wanted to hasten to say that, there are discussions and deliberations that will be coming, I think in the next 2 or 3 months at the COP28, where issues of climate change will again dominate discussions at that forum. We have had previous sessions talking about carbon emissions. Member countries and nations are pledging to make sure that they reduce their carbon emissions, climate financing, but really it really seems that the talks are just for the talk shows, a part fulfillment of those meetings. But
so I think captions and no actions.
No actions. And recently you understand that there was the Nairobi Climate Change, Africa Climate Week, where again issues of climate financing were also tabled. And I think these are conversations that need to be maintained and sustained throughout, and make sure that really nations speak with one voice to come up with a firm position to reduce carbon emissions.
Absolutely. And speaking of reducing carbon emissions, our time has been reduced. And Theo, it is most definitely a pleasure to be having you here in studio. We look forward to be having this conversation once again. And most definitely, as we close up, as Africa or as a continent, do you feel like we are doing enough? We know, this show is the headliners, and there was a headline that there is snow in South Africa. And do you think that particular episode that we saw during such a time, and in Johannesburg in particular, do we owe that to climate change and global warming, or was that something just that God was showing us that he could do?
I think as we stated earlier, I think this is a reality that we are facing as Africa. You know, if you look at South Africa and the phenomenon that happens, and even we can relate it to the latest that has happened in Libya, it tells a story of the kind of you know, disaster that humankind is facing.
And direction we're
in
going.
fact, we are racing against time.
Oh, yes.
And I think the conversation now has to be more serious than ever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Theo, thank you, Theo. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Headliner. Yes, we have been speaking to Theophilus Chuma, a seasoned broadcaster as well as a multi-award-winning individual with regards to issues, not just climate change. You'll get to follow him on social media and get to know which other issues he reports and engages on. This indeed has been an exciting segment as well as entire episode of The Headliners. We are most definitely excited to be coming back to your screens, same time, same place here on a ZBC. And most definitely, my name is Kurtley Gwindi. Kurt by name and not by nature. Please do join us again in our next episode.